Hi and welcome. I'm Peggy Caruso, owner of Life Coaching and Beyond and host of the Revolutionize podcast. Thanks for joining. I am the author of 4 books and my new one was just released, Take the First Shot, and it will be in bookstores in February of 2021. We always have very interesting guests, and today I am going to let Terry Whalin introduce himself and what he does, and hopefully you'll find it very interesting. Hi, Terry.
Hey, Peggy. Great to be with you today. Thank you very much for this opportunity. The main thing that I do these days, I'm an acquisitions editor at Morgan James Publishing. I've been there about 8 years, so I'm sort of a hunter and gatherer is what an acquisitions editor is. I find the books that we publish, but I'm much more than just an acquisitions editor. I've written for many books over the years and many publications. I've written for more than 50 magazines. I have published more than 60 books. So I know the ins and outs of the publishing world pretty strongly just because I've spent so much time in it over the years. I majored in journalism in college, and then when I left Indiana University, I took a left-hand turn. I went into linguistics actually for 10 years. And then I wandered back to my writing years ago and started writing for magazines. And that's sort of where I've been ever since.
Well, that's very, very impressive. And as you know, I'm an author as well. And so this is going to be a really fun interview for me. And actually, I've had a lot of people reach out to me recently that wanted to have me do a podcast like this with someone. So you're the perfect person for this. So let's have a great interview. So Terry, I do have a couple questions. The first one is, you had a wake up moment as an author. Can you tell us what happened then?
Yeah, Peggy. Like I say, I've written a number of books for all kinds of publishers, over 100,000 copies over the years. I've gotten a couple of times, I've gotten 6-figure advances for my books. I've been very fortunate to have those kinds of experiences in my life. But in 2007, I was a literary agent. I had a literary agency for a little while in Scottsdale, Arizona. And Mark Victor Hansen, Chicken Soup for the Soul, was doing these mega book marketing university meetings out in LA. And they invited me to come as an agent. And the way I look at it, I was kind of a cheap date in a sense because, I wasn't very far from Los Angeles. So I got out there and there were over 400 people at this event. And I sat there. I had a wake up moment while I was at that event, because at that point in my life, I'd probably written 50 books for traditional publishers. My books were out there in the bookstores, all that kind of thing. And I thought from what I was doing, I thought it was my publisher's responsibility to sell the books. I thought that they were the ones that drove people to the bookstore and they were going to sell the books. Now, I was getting negative royalty statements. A dirty little secret about publishing that hardly anybody talks about is that 90% of nonfiction books never earn back their advance. But because publishers were paying me, $10,000 more for an advance for the book, I thought that they were actually selling the books. But what I learned when I was at Mark's event is I learned that it was actually my responsibility as the author to drive people to the bookstore. Well, I wasn't doing much of that. I mean, I had a little terrywhalin.com website, but other than that, I wasn't really doing anything at all to encourage people to buy my books, whatever book I was writing. So my wake up moment was that I needed to actually take my own responsibility for this process and start actively doing something as an author to be selling my books.
I'm really glad that you brought that up, because so many people will tell me, when they're in here coaching, I want to write a book and I want to get my story out. It is very hard. I mean, I know myself, I've done 4 books, and actually when I did my first couple, I really didn't care about selling them. I really wanted to use them as a marketing tool for my business, but that's not always a good idea either. You're right. You have to really drive for the sales. So you have a new book, right? It's your 10 publishing myths. How new is that?
I came out in mid-December last year. So yes, it's my newest book and fairly recent.
Okay, so why did you write it? And what do you hope readers will do after they read it?
Yeah, I wrote that book because all the time, all kinds of unrealistic expectations that that authors have. They're going to be a bestseller. They're on the New York Times list. All these things that I hear from authors all the time. But yet, when I dig into it to see if they really could get on the New York Times list, they don't have a plan. They don't have any connections. They don't have any idea how in the world they're going to do that. They believe, and it takes much more than belief. And what I've learned, Peggy, in publishing is that many things go wrong in this process. Things are outside of the author's control. So what I tried to do in 10 Publishing Myths is authors' realistic expectations as far as what they can and can't do when it comes to the book, but then also give them action steps of what they can physically do. Mark Victor Hansen's co-author on the Chicken Soup for the Soul books wrote this book a few years ago called The Success Principles. And when I read that book, the very first success principle is that I will take 100% responsibility for my own success. Now, to be honest, none of us want to take 100% responsibility for our own success. We want somebody else to help us. We want the publisher, the agent, the publicist, somebody else out there to be able to do this, to sell our book. But that's not realistic. So I changed, from 2007. So I started a blog. I have 1,500 entries in my blog. I'm active on social media. I have 200,000 followers on Twitter. I have 18,000 connections on LinkedIn, 4,900 Facebook friends, all those kinds of things that I, as an author, can actively do. And, sure, social media is great for exposure and all that kind of thing. But the real aspect that every author should be doing relates to something that we all use. Email still is the best way for you to take control of your own book, reach people. So every author should get an email list and be building that email list, platform, whatever you want to call it, but be working on gathering those people together, because those are your people. Those are your readers, and you need to be able to touch them.
That's very, very interesting. Okay, so you talk about the 10 publishing myths. So how did you come up with the various myths? Talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, I came up with these myths because I hear these myths from people all the time. They, as you talk to authors, you can imagine they have big ambitions, big dreams as far as what's actually going to happen with their book. And the reality is, many of them may have the dream, but they don't actually have the action steps and the plans behind those dreams to actually execute them. So I tried to give the 10 of the most common myths that I hear, and I wrote one chapter about each myth. When I was finished with the book, I did gather some endorsements and from some of my editor, agent, best-selling author friends, and one of my friends who's an acquisitions editor said, "Terry, you're missing the 11th myth." I'm like, "Oh, what is the 11th myth?" She said, "Well, the 11th myth should be that if I send my book to Oprah, she'll book me on her show." And I'm like, "Well, yeah, that's a myth." So what I decided to do, Peggy, was I decided to write that 11th chapter, and I designed it so it looks exactly like the rest of the book, and people can get that free from me. If you go to my website, 10publishingmyths.com, it's the number 10, publishingmyths.com, there's a pop-up box right there where you can get that 11th myth from me for free if you do that.
That is amazing. And at the end, when you give your information, Terry, I want you to repeat that for everyone, so that they'll be very anxious to go to your site and get that. So everybody listening, go to his website and get that 11th myth for free. That's very important. So thank you for that. So what role would you say does consistency play for writers to sell books?
Well, consistency is very important. Someone has to hear about your book. They've pretty much proven this. They have to hear about it somewhere between 7 and 12 times before they actually reach into their wallet or pull out their credit card and actually buy your book. So consistency is a huge part of the process, and just getting the word out about your book. So, for example, I I use Twitter a lot. I tweet maybe 12, 15 times a day, Peggy, and I have a whole system how I do that. I don't take a lot of time to do that, but I set it all up. I use a tool called Hootsuite that's out there. And so I'm tweeting about my books, not in the content, the benefits of the book. That's what you have to emphasize when you're telling people. It's not buy my book, buy my book. It's give them a reason and a motivation why in the world they should, what benefit are they going to get from buying your book. So for example, I wrote a biography of Billy Graham over 5 years ago, but I am still talking about that book and pointing to interviews that people did with me about the book. I'm doing that every day. And that does play into my book sales and how that all works.
That's really interesting, and that's good for me to know. So, very helpful. Terry, a lot of the questions that I get, and I'm sure you get, maybe you can elaborate a little bit, is what is the best way to go? Self-publishing or through like Morgan James? I know you do a lot of work for Morgan James. What would be the best route for someone just starting out? What would you tell them?
Well, I tell them they certainly could self-publish, but there were 1.6 million self-published books last year. But what people don't say in the self-publishing area is that on average, those books sell somewhere between 100 and 200 copies during the lifetime of the book. So not very good as far as actually what happens with those books after they get published. So I think the best kind of publishing is really a consensus building team kind of approach where you all work together and get the best book out there possible. So naturally, my bent is that Morgan James is one of those best options because you still retain your rights as an author. You get your books in the bookstore. We make beautiful books. You get them out there in different formats, all those kinds of things. So there are some real advantages to going with, a group like Morgan James as opposed to doing it yourself. Recently, one of my friends here locally heard about Morgan James, but he still decided to do it himself. And by the time he hired an editor, a cover designer, an interior designer, a website builder, all these kinds of things, he ended up spending as much or more money doing that himself and then self-published and didn't even have his book out there in the bookstore when he could have gone with Morgan James.
I would agree with you, Terry, because as you know, I've done both. And I love Morgan James. I think that they are a great company to work with. The team is very helpful. So the other thing is a lot of people will say, well, Peggy, now what? Because I already self-published. And I did the same thing. You can self-publish, but you can still get picked up by someone like Morgan James, correct?
Yes, we do. We do that sometimes. We do take, and like I say, I've been with Morgan James 8 years now. I haven't done it a lot, but sometimes there is a book that has only been like maybe published on Amazon, for example. Amazon is a big customer of Morgan James, but they're only 26% of our business. So the way I look at it, if you've just published with Amazon, you're missing 76% of what we can do for the book out there. So, we sell in brick and mortar bookstores, but we also sell in Barnes and Nobles and all these places out there. So you can take your self-published book and bring it to Morgan James, and then we would, if all the details line up right, we would move it into our system and get it out there for you.
Perfect. So we're getting close to the end. Is there anything else you would like to leave everybody with? Some really good tips, some information? What would you say to everyone?
Well, Peggy, I would just encourage authors to control what they can and to let the rest go when it comes to publishing. And there are specific things that they can do. One of the things that I do in every chapter in my 10 Publishing Myths book is at the end, I have what I call an MBA, a myth buster action. And so it's your responsibility as an author to take action and really be reaching people with your message. You're the one that has the greatest passion for it. You'll have greater passion than anybody else in this process. So you have to take that passion and channel it into active steps that are really going to do something for you.
Well, that's really good advice. So if someone were looking to get a hold of you, could you give everyone your contact information?
Yeah, I actually have my regular public email address in my Twitter profile, Peggy. So I'm pretty easy to reach. Terry at terrywhalin.com, TerryWhalin.com. My Morgan James address is just my first name, Terry at morganjamespublishing.com.
Perfect. And everyone listening out there also knows that if they can't get a hold of you, they can call me or email me and I can make that connection for you. It was a pleasure having you, and I'm sure I'll have you back. So thanks a lot, Terry.
Thank you, Peggy. I really do appreciate this opportunity.